All right, let's pull out your little measuring tape here. And I'm not confident that I can lay it out so you can see the whole thing. I'm going to lay it out so you can see at least part of it. And for now, we're just going to lay it out above your theory book right here. So you can see all of your options. Now we're going to start by just labeling the notes that you would have played when you first started learning. Most violinists start on the A string and the E string, so we're going to start with the A string. It also happens to be the most logical in terms of figuring out the letter names of the notes, so we're going to start with that. And I'm actually going to match the colors that I used here. So for any of the natural notes, I'm going to put them in the same color that I used on this. I would encourage you to do the same thing so that your measuring tape and your string diagram match. All right, so we already marked where the finger tape would have been for you. And I already told you in another video, and you've probably known this from your lessons, that every time you add a finger to the string, you go up a letter in the alphabet. But there's a little bit more to it now that you know whole and half steps. Let's start by just labeling our tape notes. So this is where the first finger tape would have been. Here's the little square that represents first finger. So we're going to go ahead and put a 1 there. I'm just going to put it up in the little corner though here, because I want plenty of room to write letter names. This is the important thing to know. You've got to know letter names to be a competent musician and to know how to organize your fingers to play all of the music that you want to play. So what is first finger on A called? It's called a B. Now you probably already know that. You're just going up the alphabet. That's not so hard to figure out. But why is it called a B and not a B flat? Well, because let's use our little whole step, half step diagram. When you go from A to B, that's a whole step, isn't it? There's space between the nut and your first finger. That makes that a whole step. If I were to take my little half step measuring, between A and that first space is not a B. You know, they don't touch. You can see this little one, it goes to this empty space. That first finger where that finger tape was is a whole step. Now take that same piece of paper with whole and half step and hold it up to your measuring tape here. Just thinking in letter names from A to B is a whole step. So from a theory perspective, a whole step is when you go 2 half steps. That kind of makes sense, right? 2 halves make a whole. From a violin playing perspective, a whole step means space. And in this case, it's space between the nut and the first finger. Now, when you put your second finger where the second finger tape was, if you kind of hold this over near where the tape markings are, there's a whole step between those 2 tapes, isn't there? So when you were first learning, maybe your teacher explained this to you, maybe they didn't. That probably depends on how old you were when you started. But that's a whole step. And what did I say about a theoretical approach to whole steps? Theoretical, that means music theory. Well, if I put my whole step here, if I go from B a whole step, that's 2 half steps, that means that second finger is C sharp. It's not just called C, it's called C sharp. So I'm going to label that tape note. I'm going to give it a second finger. And I'm going to put both of the options for what that can be called in that space. It can be called C sharp. That's generally what you've been playing up until now. But it can also be called D flat, and that's going to come up for you when you're a very competent violin player. Now, look at these 2 tapes though. They're really near each other, and when you first start playing, those fingers touch, don't they? If you take your half step measurement, you can see the second and third finger, they fit perfectly. The little points of your half step are pointing right to those finger tapes. If you put your fingers together, they're pointing to here and to here. We're going to put something in this square. What's it going to be? Take your little half step measurement. This one's a C sharp, so make sure that this little point is pointing to the C sharp. I just got some water on my tape. We're going to ignore that. And what is it pointing at here? That means that that third finger is called a D. It's a half step in the feeling of your fingers. It's a half step in music theory. It's called a D because of that. So I'm going to label that. That's third finger, and we call it a D. It's really not that complicated if you know all your options and you know that rule about space is whole step, no space is half step. Then you can think, well, how did I play that when I was a beginner? Did my fingers touch? Did they not touch? And you can figure out letter names based on that. And once you understand this, you'll also understand that no matter where you put your finger, it's got to be one of these. And if this is an A and this is a B, what does this one have to be called? A sharp or B flat? It's what's in between the A and the B. Let's label it while we're at it. It would be played with a first finger. This would be called a low 1. If you haven't learned it yet, that's okay. Your teacher will show you how to play it. So we're going to put a 1 there, and we're going to label it like we did the other ones that have two options where the A sharp is on top and the B flat is on bottom. So now your first finger could either play back here closer to the nut and be playing this note that we call either A sharp or B flat, or it could be in that place where you either had or have a tape, and that would be a B. You could call it a B natural, but you can just say B. Okay, let's fill in this little square right here. Well, what's a half step away from B? If my first finger is here and I touch it with my second finger instead of leaving a space, that's a low 2. You might have learned that already. Well, a low 2, let's see. I move this over. It's a half step because they're touching. And it's a half step in music theory like so. So if this part is pointing to a B, what's that next one called? It's called a C, just a C. C natural, just a C. You would play that with your second finger. So we're going to put a 2, and then we're going to put a big old C. And just like on our little measuring tape, there's nothing between B and C. Look at that. And check this out. How brilliant is this? If I do say so myself. You can take your measuring tape, line it up. This is why your squares needed to be correct. And it will tell you every single note you need to know. Okay, so let's look at this next one. You've played your third finger on the tape. What if you moved it higher? That would be called a high 3. You can also play it with a low 4, but for now, we're going to put a 3 there because it's the most common thing that people do first. So in this square right underneath the D, let's put a 3. And what would it be called? Either a D sharp or an E flat. So let's label it. And that is a half step in your fingers, meaning that this one would be right next to this one. You scooch it up just a tiny half step, and it's a half step in music theory. So orderly. Once you understand how orderly the instrument is, it's not so hard to figure things out. That doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to play everything. You still have to practice, but you'll understand it in a way where that practice will be easier. All right, if you have a fourth finger tape, it's here. If you don't have a fourth finger tape, or you've never used your fourth finger, well, you will one day, so let's figure out what it's called. It's an E, obviously. It's right next to E on our measuring tape. And you'll notice that the fourth finger always matches the name of the next open string. The difference in the sound is just down to tone. If you're playing in tune, this fourth finger should sound the same as this, but it will have a mellower sound.